Welcome to the Digital Campus Podcast with eCampus Ontario, the show for educators and learners who are participating in and shaping the future of higher education in the digital era. Each episode features insightful conversations with leaders in education and other experts to bring you valuable perspective and strategies for navigating digital pedagogy in higher education today and tomorrow. The Digital Campus Podcast is where innovation meets higher ed.
Hello, and welcome to the Digital Campus Podcast with eCampus Ontario. I'm your host, Robert Luke. Our goal for this podcast is to explore the issues and challenges of transforming higher education in the digital era. In this episode, we're diving deep into the crucial role that Indigenous institutes play in supporting education, cultural resilience, and sovereignty. Here with me today is Brent Tookenay, Chief Executive Officer at 7 Generations Education Institute, an Indigenous-led educational organization that provides high school, post-secondary training for employment and cultural programming to Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. Welcome to the show, Brent.
Bonjour, Robert. Thanks very much for having me. I'll introduce myself in my language. Ogima Benez Indigo, Kuching Nindonji, Biju Nindondem. So I just wanted to honor our elders, and when I'm speaking to very important people like you, Robert, it's important to start it off in a good way. So thanks very much for having me.
Bonjour, Brent. Maybe we could start and you can just tell us a little bit about 7 Generations Educational Institute and where you're located.
Okay, for sure. So 7 Generations Education Institute, we've been in operation for almost 40 years now. We're located, our main campus is located in the southern part of Treaty 3, and we're governed by the 10 First Nations in the southern part of Treaty 3. We have campuses in Fort Frances, Kenora, and Sioux Lookout, offices in Thunder Bay and programming in Thunder Bay. We have 22 First Nations out of the 28 First Nations in Treaty 3. We provide community programming to, community-based programming, I should say, as well as First Nations in the Thunder Bay area, Robinson Treaty area as well. So yeah, we cover about 55,000 square kilometers of Treaty 3 area. So if people don't know where Treaty 3 is, it's basically northwestern Ontario.
That's a huge area, and 10 different nations as well. It's a good kind of lead into one of the first questions I was hoping to ask you, which is, can you elaborate on what is meant by cultural resilience and how it is actively promoted within your educational programs?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot here, Robert. It's a big question, cultural resilience, but I think if we look at it from our perspective and hopefully from our students' perspective when they do attend our programs and come to our institute, is that everyone will thrive in the institute. That means Anishinaabe, non-Anishinaabe. I should say that we're an Anishinaabe institute, and with Ojibwe, Anishinaabemowin. There's other institutes in Ontario, as you're aware of, that are Mohawk and that, and but I'm speaking from the perspective of a Treaty 3 organization and the leadership here. So for cultural resilience, I think, as I mentioned, everyone will thrive in this system. As I said, both Anishinaabe, non-Anishinaabe. We build our system around Minnow Bimadzawin. And as if you're not aware of that, that means the good life or working towards a good life. And I think that that's something that's maybe a foundational, not maybe, but it is a foundational piece for our organization. Grounded in language, culture, Minnow Bimadzawin. And I guess, what does that look like? What does Minnow Bimadzawin look like in action? It's relationship to land and this and that. Well, probably the best example I can give, Robert, is probably with our culinary program. So we have students in there, and they're learning about how to prepare food and safe food handling, et cetera, et cetera. But I think what Minnow-Bomotswin brings in is their relationship to the food. So when they're preparing the food, it is medicine. And if you care in your relationship to that, it will make you healthy or make the people that you're feeding healthy. If you don't pay attention and do things maybe not the good way, you could actually turns it dangerous or poison. So probably a more practical way, because lots of times even us as Anishinaabe people, we don't maybe understand the entire concept of Minnow-Bomotswin. It's working towards a good life, but that means a lot of things.
Right.
And so for our institute, I think that's important that we that's probably the best example, but it's just about the entire organization, from students to staff, all staff, our board of directors, all together and trying to provide an environment where people can succeed and feel comfortable and move forward together. So that's probably the best way I can describe cultural resilience.
That's really amazing. I really like the concept of Minnow-Bomotswin, because it really encompasses the self-actualization of the person, the role of education in helping realize that, but also, as you say, the cultural grounding in community, which is, as we know, really, really important, and certainly really important it's important for anybody, but I would say extra important for Indigenous communities recovering from decades of colonization.
Yes.
I wonder if
I can add, Robert, just to that as well, like, Anishinaabe, if you translate that into English, it actually means human being. And so when you say Anishinaabe, it actually is talking about all the people within the organization, even though, it's used as Anishinaabe Institute and that.
Right.
So I wanted to add that in there because, it's important because, our board of directors changed the mission statement, probably about 8 years ago. It used to say education opportunities in our mission for the Anishinaabe. And they changed that education opportunities for everyone, because our organization really believes that, in order to move past, like, as you mentioned, colonization and build cultural resilience and all those things, we have to do it together. It can't be, just one group of people doing it or one organization. It has to be together and trying to make the best possible, opportunities for the youth and for the future of not only Seven Gens, but of the country.
Of course. Yeah, no, 100%, Brent, completely aligned with that. Maybe you could provide us with some specific examples or elements of how you define the kind of holistic support systems that you use at Seven Generations. It strikes me that would be pretty important.
Yeah, Robert, great question. I think not only our institute, but I think the other 8 institutes, not to speak for them, but we're built around accessibility and breaking down barriers. And lots of those barriers are things such as food insecurity and even having clothing or even food on the table at home. And so when we start talking about wraparound services, that includes, cultural and mental wellness, but everything like coat drives and things to help people, succeed. And I think one of the most important things that we do is you have to break down the stigmas that are associated with that, food insecurity or not having a winter coat or whatever. So I think that's really important. I mean, we have our Eagle staff, Gokamisanan, and our drum, Sajikaway, and they sit at our main campus here, and the students can access those and just sit with them, offer a sema, tobacco to them. That is the foundation and guidance of the organization, but it allows students to to be there, to participate in ceremonies when we do have them. They know that the drum and the staff is there to support them. And so it encompasses a whole bunch of things. And I think what's important about it too, Robert, is that, it's not just Seven Gens. We work with the broader community because, we have to, because if they come to our buildings or campuses for 6 hours a day or 4 hours a day, what's happening those other 20 hours or 18 hours a day, and how are the supports built outside? So we work with our community partners and the broader community, our First Nations, to make sure, if there's something that's not there or that's needed, we work hard to make that happen so they have every chance to succeed. And it's difficult sometimes, life has gotten in the way, but what I can say for our institute, I think that's what we're known for. We're not, we don't have 30,000 students here. We're able to really build those relationships and them feel comfortable about being at Seven Gens and knowing that this organization is for them.
Right. That's really amazing to hear, Brent, and really points to the central role of education, but also Seven Gen as an organization in the community, and kind of following along the conversation here, talking about having access to the staff and the drum is strikes me as, really important, again, for reclaiming culture and language after, all the wrongs that have been done through colonizations. And maybe, can you tell us a little bit about how Seven Gen is contributing to the preservation of Indigenous cultures more broadly while providing education? And you mentioned to both Indigenous and non-Indigenous individuals. It strikes me as that's a really unique and important avenue.
Yeah, I think I've said for a number of years that, and I actually, it comes from the actor Hugh Jackman, who he's from Australia, and that there's an interview on YouTube they did a number of years back that he had no idea about. Very similar what happened in Australia to the Indigenous people there and the Maoris and everything. And he talks about that, not ever knowing about that, and how the culture and the teachings and everything are good for all people. It's not just good for, an Indigenous person. And I think that always resonated with me, for someone of that stature to acknowledge that his education had holes in it. Like the true histories weren't there. And as you know, Robert, in Canada, there's the history, but there's actually the real history of what happened. And so, I refer to that quite often, but for Seven Gens, when we look at the things such as how are we providing education to both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, I look at that and say, okay, just because it comes from an Anishinaabe teaching or whatever, doesn't mean it has lesser value than something else. And so when we do things such as Quest for Knowledge, that is a language competition where we bring all the youth, all the schools from around Treaty 3, and they have this competition, and the elders are the judges. It's almost like, like a Reach for the Top / Jeopardy, all these different types of games. And the kids just have, and we've been doing it for a number of years. Every fall, we have what we call as a fall harvest, and it's all elders and knowledge keepers from around the district, and they provide teachings, anything from how to fillet a fish and netting fish to, wild rice processing and deer and et cetera, storytelling. Well, not so much storytelling, but kind of like talking about the culture, because storytelling is for the wintertime and talking about legends. So we try to do those types of things that, like, they're direct acts of resurgence, I guess you could say, because they're built in and they have been for years. And I think that's important that we have a good mixture of, let's just say the technical aspects of, your education that, whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, you need, but also the the ability and the opportunity to participate in these things that can help you in the other parts of your education as well. So I think we do a really good job. We've been able to access elders in the building, like they're become employees of 7 Gen, so they're available for even just a simple conversation, whether it's a staff member or student, and I think that's important. They give the feel of a real like it's a home, and so I think that other things that students and different core programs participate in, like medicine picking and doing things such as other harvesting activities, such as tanning moose hide and all the processes and teachings that go with that. So I think we're always trying to do more, but
Right.
the challenge is that our knowledge keepers and elders are in demand, not just by our organization, but everybody else in the area too. So so they only got so much time in their day, those great folks that we access.
Well, in some respects, we all feel that. I mean, it's actually, if I reflect on it, a really good indicator of the resurgence. And I love the description of bringing together kids from both Indigenous and non-Indigenous to play games and discovery of the language, because it's such a great way to invite everybody into, first of all, understanding the past. And you make a good point about like the history. Well, I grew up in Saskatchewan, and I was not taught nearly like anything to do with the history that of Indigenous people. I had many classmates who were Indigenous, and I think back now, like what were they thinking when they were going through the same education experience? So I think the realization of people like Hugh Jackman is good to dwell on, because I think we are all coming up against that realization and realizing that we weren't taught about the terrible things that have happened. And when you're inviting people into language, you're inviting them into co-create the future in a way that is more focused on community. So kudos to you for doing that at 7 Gen. That's fantastic.
Yeah, well, thanks.
It does make me think of another question, which is how you're striking the balance between meeting the cultural and community needs while also addressing those practical aspects, such as employment training, post-secondary education skills. And what can you tell me about that, Brent?
Well, I think from what we've built and what I've told you so far, it's the foundational pieces. I talked about the drum and the staff, but also the other foundational pieces, the language, Minnow Bimatswin. Those are the foundation pieces. Instead of trying to weave those things in, per se, formal education, we build the formal education around the foundational pieces. It's kind of, you always hear we're trying to indigenize something or we're trying to do that. We actually looked at it and say, okay, let's make these as who we are as an Anishinaabe Institute in Treaty 3. What are the values and what do our elders want us to stand for, and what are the values? And then we build everything around there, because how do you look at cultural activities in a welding program or whatever, but it's more about it's our ways of knowing and doing that a student is able to understand those concepts and live those concepts, so they're successful in their programs and moving forward. So we provide those foundational pieces. And then I think the other thing is and I think I mentioned this to you, and we've talked previously, Robert. We respond to community needs. It's not like, we know what we're running, say 5 years from now, or even 3 years from now.
Right.
What happens is if, a community needs a training program, or they need, ECEs or whatever it may be, nurses, we respond to those needs and we're able to shift on the fly and be nimble that way. That's a lot different than, say, a mainstream college or university would run, just because of the way their dynamics and they have to run. But this is what we do. And that's why, Seven Gens exists, is to break down those barriers and allow us to respond to community needs and make sure that we're trying to help support what they need on their community. As you're aware, there's many of our First Nations have economic development corporations and companies. I always use the example of Negagusa owning a golf course, trucking company, busing company, clothing company, marina. That's a vast array of skills that you need to run those operations. And so we try to support, First Nations like that as best as we can. And we're pretty nimble and pretty good at doing that because we've had to do it for almost 40 years,
Right.
So yeah, so I hope that answers the question.
It does. It does. I love the the approach that you have of being nimble, being responsive. And I can see that providing the grounding in the cultural teachings is going to make the employment-based skills acquisition even better. Because as if we're all comfortable in our own ways of being, we're going to bring our best self forward and
yes,
realize. And I love the point you make about First Nations owned companies and entities as well. I've heard the term economic reconciliation before, which I think is a really good one, because it means that our Indigenous communities and the First Nations governments are taking control over resources, or the means of production, if you will, in order to provide the jobs and wealth in their own societies.
Yes, that's exactly. And one thing too, like I mentioned, we have different campuses and we talk about, that grounding or whatever. We're respectful and understand that each of our campuses has there might be a little slight nuances and differences in teachings in that. So we make sure that we're responsive to that as well. It's not like, as you're aware, not one size doesn't fit all. Like, I'm speaking on behalf of Seven Generations Education Institute. There's 8 other institutes that do great work as well and are grounded in who they are as Indigenous people as well. So, but yeah, we try our best to do that. Again, we lean heavily on our elders and knowledge keepers for guidance in this area, and I think we do a fairly good job. But again, those folks are in demand and they're not getting any younger each year either.
That's a fair point. Maybe you could elaborate a bit, actually, speaking of that, on the modalities that you use to share insights within communities. So you talked a little bit about being responsive, but you're also sharing back as well. And how do you, and working with elders, and how do you ensure that the knowledge and teachings are effectively embraced and shared throughout communities?
Yeah, that's a really good question too, Robert. I probably the easiest way to explain it from my perspective, and this is just mine alone, but to me, it's our stories and legends are our histories.
Right.
And I think that's, there's certain things that happen, like I had mentioned earlier about, January and February is time where we tell legends, and that's the only time of the year. And there's different things that, that are owned by each community, stories for each community, each have their own history, and they have their own legends and stories and ways that although they may be talking about the same, maybe it's Nana Bajou or whoever, there always is little small parts that maybe aren't identical, but they're still there. And so I think that's really important in moving forward when we think about the importance, because when we talk about language maybe a bit later, we talk about elders were always it's an oral language. We don't want to write down and this and that. And so that's where the stories and legends comes in. It was always back in the day where you're sitting, whether you're in a roundhouse or etc., and these things are told. So I think the other part of it is, a learner decides to come to Seven Gens for a reason. And so when they decide to come there, whether they're in secondary school, post-secondary training, whatever it may be, they're here. They have the ability to access what we can offer, and at the end of the day, it's really hard. Like they see a path forward that keeps them coming here and keeps them wanting to be engaged. So it's really hard to kind of quantify that sometimes. We all want to see, okay, well, check this box and this is the reasons why or whatever. But I think it has a lot to do with just the feeling that it's their education and they're taking ownership of it. And these are the things that we have to help support them. And sometimes we're missing some things that we need to work on to support them. But I think it's really hard they've made a decision to come here, and they have the ability to, understand, but maybe both histories, Robert, the ones that, you and I maybe grew up with that didn't acknowledge any of the accomplishments or the real histories of this country, and they have a chance to understand that, and I think that's really important because these young people are going to take whatever they learn here at Seven Gens or any other institute, and that's what they're going to apply in the world. So it's good that we're able to bring some more understanding to even their own personal history if they're from one of our First Nations. So and I think that's important. It really grounds the student, and
Sure.
And it grounds the staff too, because the staff, we have to date 308 employees at Seven Gens. Not everybody is a First Nation person here, so.
Right.
So it's important that we all have these types of learning opportunities and that. So I think we're never satisfied. Let's put it that way.
Well, that as the head of an educational institution, that's a good position to take. Brent, you mentioned elders a couple of times, and I know the importance of elders and the oral traditions and stories and legends to the Indigenous culture. Could you share with us a little bit about how you're integrating the Indigenous histories and teachings from elders into your educational framework, and what impact does this have on the overall learning experience and to students?
Well, as I said, those are our histories, the legends and stories, and I think that I guess the easiest way to maybe say this is that it's hard to measure how this impacts, other than you could say graduation rates or whatever. But I think probably the most important thing is we have a shared colonial history, I guess you could say, that we all kind of grew up with, even when I say that in young folks today. And there's still these misconceptions in that of what has happened. When I mentioned earlier about elders being in our campuses and in our classrooms and that, they're accessible, and you've heard that it's no secret. But I think the difference in Seven Generations is that students are able to sit down one-on-one with elders for periods of time. They can really connect with them, and if they're from one of the communities, they know there's family histories and there's things like that. There's a more clear maybe understanding than maybe challenging like a mainstream that has 30,000 students. It's hard to do that, even 5,000 students. So I think that's important. One of the things that being immersed in this environment that appropriates this understanding is like a breath of fresh air that you never know you needed. And I asked one of my staff members, and I wrote this down so I could, because I knew I'd screw it up if I did it. And I think that statement really resonates a lot, because you don't even know it if you're a student here or even a staff member. All of a sudden, you're doing things for the right reasons, and you're not doing them because a partner institute says you have to, or because this regulation says you have to. We're doing things that make sense to help our students, to help the communities. And I think that's probably the best way to put it when you're bringing elders, not bringing them in for a reason. They're back in the day when the education on communities was from the elders and knowledge keepers. It wasn't from someone else.
Yeah. I love that what you just said. It's like a breath of fresh air that you didn't know you needed.
Yeah.
That's such a beautiful way to talk about the power of education, the cultural resilience, all the things that we're chatting about here. That's really quite nice.
Well, yeah, and I thought about this question, but like when you sit with an elder and you have before, and whether they gave you a teaching or just chatted with you, you walk away and you just got this feeling that, man, like what just happened there? But I feel good, And I think that's how our students feel when our elders are there. So it's really, I think you know what I mean, but it's just really, really, we're so grateful and so lucky to have some of the people from the communities to help us. Like, I can't say enough about that, Robert. We would not be where we're at in our language and histories and Middle Bomatswin and things if we didn't get the guidance from the leadership, my board, but also the elders and knowledge keepers from the communities and the leadership from the communities.
Yeah, it's really well said. I mentioned earlier before we started the recording that I've been learning a little bit of Anishinaabe in order to understand the perspective, because you really see a difference in language, or you see how people approach the world when you learn some of the language. And to me, it's been really eye-opening. And I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about language revitalization, because technology is always highlighted as a tool for language revitalization. And can you share specific initiatives or approaches at 7Gen that leverage technology, for example, that are helping you with revitalization of languages, or even just not even technology? I mean, I would think just like sitting with the elders and learning, a little bit that way would help. But this is about the digital campus, so maybe you can talk about the digital.
Well, yeah, you know what, Robert, it's a great question, and I had mentioned earlier. I think back a number of years ago, we had a conference, language conference, and we had fluent speakers from various First Nations, and I remember, it got to a point in this one session where elders stood up, and this is an oral language. We shouldn't be writing it down. We shouldn't be recording it, and this and that. And the one fellow we work with, Mike Parkhill, who kind of project manages some of the technology pieces, and he said, so when you pass on, how is your language being passed on to the young people in your communities? Because you're saying that they're not coming to sit with you, or they're not interested in learning language and that. So that was kind of, I don't know if it was an aha moment, but it was a moment where I think everybody had to take a deep breath and kind of reflect and say, okay, so how do we use this, but respect and honor the sacredness of the language? And so that's probably the biggest thing that you have to do when you bring technology and language and try to mesh the two or utilize technology. I mean, obviously preserving the language and is very important, and recording it, writing it, documenting it, those types of things. You take guidance from the knowledge keepers and elders to, if something's offside, it's offside, or is there a workaround or something? We've experienced that, where, we've worked on avatars and things, computer generated language apps and things like that. Because one of the challenges is, is just that, is getting over the sacredness, because there's so much, the richness of the language and how it's tied to ceremony, and that is really important to honor and to understand, and not to do something that disrespects that. And so we ran into a situation where we had to. There was a couple knowledge keepers and speakers that did not want the avatars, and then they pointed us to guidance to an elder that they respect, and he felt that it was important that we utilize technology and avatars, because that's what the young people are listening to these days.
Right.
And it's, so we always look at it as an enhancement, as opposed to a replacement. And I think that's really important. I'll give you a couple of stats of how we're utilizing specific initiatives. So we developed a language learning platform that is now used by over 7,000 people, 220 teachers, providing 80,000 hours of instruction in this past year.
Amazing.
Yeah, we one of our graduates from our immersion program, Jessica, when she found out those numbers, she got all choked up, and she said, "That means I'll be teaching the language 100 years after I pass." And I said, and it was kind of like, yeah. So she got, and then another stat, we got 3,500 students, teachers, parents using our Anishinaabemodal.ca on a weekly basis. The internet, I guess the message allows for universal use and free access to the knowledge, as you know, being the head of eCampus. And then even as far as Oklahoma, they're using our books and translating them into the, might butcher this, the Potawatomi tribe or language there. So wow. I think that's what's really cool about it. It's transferable, and it's just, again, going back, it's so important to make sure that we don't go offside on things and don't disrespect the sacredness of the language. And I think that's probably the best way to put that.
Those are some great stats and great story, and a couple of lessons that really popped up for me are direct the use of technology. Don't just use it because you can.
Yes.
But think about the pedagogical, and in this case also the cultural value of the technology. And what a great story for language revitalization, which, as we know, is such an important part of cultural revitalization. And for me, as primarily an English speaker, looking at this as a path towards reconciliation. It reminds me of the story you told earlier about getting the kids from local schools to come and play the game and be themselves into, here's how the Anishinaabe call these things. It's a great tool. That's really uplifting. I'm going to have to look for that tool to learn a few more words myself.
Right on.
So I'm just going to take a little pause here, because I have two questions left, Brian. But I think the one that starts with "as the CEO" should be last. So I'm going to just segue to the technology one, and then I'm going to go into the other one. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Okay, cool. I'll get back into camera mode.
Sorry about that. I thought I turned it off. Sorry.
What's that?
Oh, my phone started ringing.
Oh, I didn't hear it.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I thought I turned it off. I put it behind me.
It always happens. I was on one of these podcasts once, and my actual landline was ringing, because it was my mom, and she's like, "Hey, you're on TV, or like on the internet." I'm like, "Yeah, I know."
I love that. Oh, it's good.
3, 2. So that's just a great story, Brent. The role of technology in language revitalization. Now, with the increasing role of technology in education, can you comment a little bit about how Seven Generations Education Institute ensures that these digital tools used in the learning experience align with and respect Indigenous cultural values and traditions. I mean, you had a good example about the elders doing some consultation about the avatars, but is there a wider framework that you approach these things with?
I think that as I mentioned earlier, we always want to, if it's something that is, something new that may be, whether it's recording of certain things, like, a good example of this is there's these songs that are used at traditional funerals, and there's less and less people that are knowing some of these songs. And the chair of my board and I were talking about that, and we talked about, okay, so how do we know whether we can record that song or not, Naomi? And so that's where you bring in the elders and say, okay, there's certain things that can only be spoken about in wintertime and things like that. But we want to get away from that it's not fear teaching. It's more about, respecting, just some protocols and the sacredness of certain things. And it's not about teaching, well, don't do that kind of thing, because that's the last thing that our elders want. Is they want people to participate, and they want people to actually make mistakes so they can learn and correct. I mean, that's how you get better. And so I think that's really important. And I think way back when when Treaty 3 was signed, there was an agreement there, and I'm not gonna, per se quote what they said, but it basically says between the non-Anishinaabe person and the chief, they agreed that, we will share what's good from both of our cultures for our youth in order to make their lives better. And I think that's really what Seven Gens does. We try our best to give opportunities in both worlds, and especially when it comes to language and culture and that. And then also what's good, technology. I mean, just because you're from a First Nation community doesn't mean you don't have an iPhone or iPad or whatever the latest technology is now. I think that's, you have to meet them at that place, provide those opportunities, but knowing that there's at a point when they get to a certain fluency or understanding of the language, they utilize technology when they have to, but they seek out elders and speakers because they need to.
Right.
And I think that probably explains it the best there, of how we utilize technology. They're never going to replace the speakers, but what we can do is really enhance and give more opportunities when they're at home. Because, someone who's, say, learning the language and they're in grade, let's just say grade 8, learn from the school board, maybe doing some languaging. In most cases, their parents are not speakers. Right. Maybe their grandparents, I'm kind of aging myself now, but, so how do you provide those opportunities where they can learn together, family, grandmother, aunt, whatever, if that's been taken from them. So I think technology plays a huge role there. And I think, as long as we continue to follow the protocols and seek that guidance, are we going to make mistakes? You bet we're going to make mistakes. And that's where our elders are there to help guide us and steer us in the right directions. And that's what I think makes language revitalization and preservation really, really important, is to take that lead. Don't think you're leading it. Seven Gens, I always say we're not the keeper of the language or whatever. That's our communities. That's the communities that govern us. We're just a tool that helps them to do that, to be able to facilitate things, be able to bring things together, to record things. So that's, I guess that's probably the best way to put it, Robert.
Oh, it's beautifully put, Brent. And I really love the concept of respect-based teaching and learning, to move away from, I'm, fear-based, as you put it, like, I don't want to get it wrong. It really, really helps to invite people in to really imagine that future. And I wasn't aware of the context and the treaty that you just mentioned. that the signatories were talking about, taking the best from both for the world. It strikes me that that's exactly what you are doing. It's protecting and supporting the Indigenous cultural resilience while enabling people to see themselves, like living in both of those worlds, as you put it.
Yeah, I will send you that, Robert. I'll email you this afternoon. I'll get the exact context of everything.
Cool.
But it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, no, it really is. This whole conversation has been really powerful. But maybe I'll just kind of conclude. Brent, says, ask you as as a CEO, I want to ask you. You're a CEO of 7Gen, and like, what do you see as the key challenges and opportunities ensuring inclusive and culturally rich education at your institution? And how are you addressing them? Like, you've covered a lot of this right now, but I'm just, how would you sum all that up?
Yeah, that's as you're aware, Robert, from our previous work together, and some of the challenges that not only 7Gens has had, but Indigenous institutes across the country, essentially, but in Ontario specifically, is the biggest challenge is resources. We talk about elders and speakers and this and that, but lots of times we have no problem paying for consultants and lawyers or whatever we need to do to operate the organization. But all of a sudden there isn't money there to pay for the most important people that you need to help with your organization.
Right.
I think one of the things that I want to emphasize is in Indigenous institutes, and speaking specifically of 7Gens, like the people that come to our institute are new people in the system. It's not like that they were at University of Toronto or wherever and they decided, oh, I'm going to transfer to 7Gens. These are new people in the system that that there's been barriers and accessibility challenges. So I think that, for governments and the sector to understand that's an important piece, because we're able to change the lives of people so they can make a better life for themselves, for their communities. I think as I mentioned earlier, the challenges too with our knowledge keepers and that, they're getting older year to year, and they're in more and more demand, and so that's a challenge for an institute like 7Gens, who relies heavily on their guidance and on their direction. If I was to sum it up in the best way is, we talked a little bit on the Blue Ribbon panel there in a number of our meetings about French language colleges, universities, and those types of things, and they're built around having French as the core foundation of their education. Well, that's exactly what Indigenous institutes would like, So if we could be able to access core funding or allocations that are directly related to that, then you can do more. It's not like you're always trying to make ends meet, or pulling money from here to do this. And I think that that's really important. If that could be kind of understood, because from government or whoever it may be, because it's that's why French language exists, is because universities and colleges because the foundation is French.
Yeah.
Our foundation is Anishinaabe and their culture. It's the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's really well put, and as we talked about on those meetings, it's not just the right thing to do. It's actually the thing that we have to do, because it is your right.
Yeah.
Right. It is the right of Indigenous peoples to be educated and to be educated in their language. And I'm really grateful that I happen to be living and working at a time in this sector when we have come to that realization where we have to work together and to support Indigenous institutes. You make a great point about the need for resources, and I hope that message resonates with everybody who's listening in on this podcast, because we all need to be aware of the great work that you are doing at 7Gen and the other 8 Indigenous institutes here in Ontario, as you mentioned. And we also need to be aware that we are all part of the solution. to helping everybody realize their role in society.
Yeah, no, very well said, Robert. I've spoken to other key leaders from the other institutes about some of the conversations and about your steadfast statements about Indigenous education and Indigenous institutes and the support that is needed for them, and so. I appreciate that because, and I know the others do too, because, we can't take this battle on our own. We need champions, and so, we're doing what we can, and we're doing well, and we're changing the lives of people, but we always trying to do more and have the ability to do more. So, I just wanted to thank you for that.
Well, Chi-miigwech, Brent, it's my pleasure to be your willing accomplice and that of our other institutes here. Listen, this has been an amazing conversation. I could talk with you all day. You've got such a great story to tell at Seven Generations Educational Institute and the work that you are doing there, and certainly in all of the communities. Is there anything else that you want to add before we close?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add the history of Seven Gens, and I want to reference a man by the name of Delbert Horton. Delbert was the original CEO, and he retired in 2014, and he gave this words of advice to me. It wasn't a lot. He said, Seven Gens is in a pretty good place, Brett, but you have to reinvent it. And I wasn't sure what he meant, but I know what he meant now. He meant about the language, the culture, the traditions, and all that as being the foundational pieces, utilizing the drum and the staff and having students be able to access to it. And I wanted to say Del too, like we talked a little bit and you can find this on the Indigenous Advanced Education and Skills Council. They did an interview with him, and Del has passed on, but in the interview, he says he was talking to a young lady on his community, and she was in the public school system, and she said that she only felt good about herself one day of the year, and that one day was the Indigenous Day or Native Day. So when you think about that, Del's vision was to create an organization that would help his people, help the people. And so I wanted to honor Del a little bit, in this podcast, because it's his vision and the vision of the leadership back then when they asked Delbert to take on this role. And I think, he's passed on this great big aircraft carrier to take and help the people with. So I just wanted to honor Del a little bit with that, if that's okay, Robert.
Absolutely. That's very beautiful, Brent. So thank you very much again, Chi-miigwech, to Brent Tookenay, CEO at Seven Generations Educational Institute, for joining me today. That's it for this episode of the Digital Campus Podcast with eCampus Ontario. Thank you again, Brent Tookenay, CEO at Seven Generations Education Institute, for joining me today. We'll include links to the examples and some of the other resources that you mentioned, Brent, as well as to the socials, so that you can connect with them online. So thank you again for joining me and for an excellent conversation.
Yeah, thanks very much, Robert, and it was nice catching up again.
Fabulous.
Thank you for joining eCampus Ontario on the Digital Campus Podcast, the show for educators who are shaping the future of higher education in the digital era. If you like the show, please subscribe now and share a link to it with your connections. Visit our website and follow us on X and LinkedIn for more information, tools, and support to successfully navigate digital pedagogy in higher ed for today and tomorrow. Funded by the Government of Ontario.